Hello and welcome to Larry Flynn's All Ball Podcast. You know who I am. I'm your host, Larry Flynn. All right, we got the draft tonight, which means that I'm bringing you my mock draft. That's right, it's the All Ball Podcast mock draft special. I'm going to walk you through picks 1 through 30, and I'll tell you a little bit about some second rounders that I like as well. But for picks 1 through 30, I'm going to tell you what player each team will be picking. I'm not going to do any trades. It gets too complicated. But I'm going to tell you what player each team is picking, and I will give you a NBA comparison or two. Sometimes it kind of boils down to one player that these prospects are more similar to, and sometimes it's kind of a hybrid of a few different players. And then I'll kind of explain the pick and why it makes sense for this team in particular. Now keep in mind the way that I do mock drafts is I don't do what I want to have happen, right? I'm going to pick what I think is going to happen. I think people get confused a lot of times with mock drafts about, well, is this what he wants? Is this what, what's going on here? No, I'll make it very clear up front. This is probably what is going to happen. I wouldn't necessarily agree with some of the moves that I made in this mock draft, but I think this is what the outcome, this will be very close to the outcome that we will see tonight. I'll guarantee that. Without further ado, why don't we get started? Philly's on the clock. They're on the clock already. Everyone knows who they're taking. They're taking Ben Simmons. That's an absolute guarantee. The huge question with Ben Simmons, obviously, is the jump shot, but there's no questioning his court vision, which makes my first comparison for him, and this is not meant as a shot or anything, just think about when this player was at the peak of his game, but he reminds me a lot of Lamar Odom. He's got that ability to run the floor, make point guard plays, but at the same time, he's got a lot of athleticism. So he's got a little bit of Blake Griffin in him, too. And also, I think he's got a little bit of that Iggy, a kind of playmaker, a little bit of athleticism. It's hard to peg Ben Simmons exactly, but I think those are three players that whose game he most resembles. I do not think Ben Simmons is going to be an absolute stud and superstar. It is absolutely up to Philly to create a good roster around him. That means that Nerlens Noel and or Jahlil Okafor need to be traded as soon as possible. They're best off keeping Nerlens, of course, just because of, with Ben Simmons, you're going to want to build a kind of run-and-gun team, right? So if the Sixers can get away with a Jahlil Okafor for, say, the Celtics 3-pick trade, Philly does that in a heartbeat. So we have Philly taking Ben Simmons. That means the Lakers take Brandon Ingram. That one's obvious. I love it. It's such a good fit. Brandon Ingram is awesome. And of course he ends up on the arch nemesis LA Lakers for the Celtics fans that are listening. Brandon Ingram is a little bit like a baby KD. He reminds me of Durant in a lot of ways. His smooth jumper, his kind of subtle athleticism. But he actually kind of reminds me of another name that I'm going to throw out there for some of the Hardwood Classics fans. He's got a little Glenn Rice in his game. And again, when you hear some of these names, I'm not trying to tear these guys down. Glenn Rice was a phenomenal shooter, a phenomenal scorer back in the 90s. And I think, Rice kind of had a little pull-up game. He had he took it to the rim on occasion. But he was just an all-around complete offensive player. Brandon Ingram reminds me of that type of player. He will fit in great in LA. And now things start to get really, really interesting. Picks 3 through 7, I don't think anyone has any idea yet what is going to happen. I'll do my best to project what is about to happen right here. The Boston Celtics are on the clock, and there's no obvious pick for the Celtics to make. You got the shooting of Buddy, the shooting of Murray. You got the overall tenacity of a Jaylen Brown, of a Chris Dunn. You got the versatility of a Dragan Bender. And those seem to be the main choices here. I think that the Boston Celtics tonight will pick Chris Dunn with the 3rd overall pick. That's right. I think Chris Dunn will end up in a Boston Celtics jersey. Let me explain. First of all, Chris Dunn is the kind of player that Danny Ainge gravitates towards. Ainge loves athletic, defensive-minded guards. Just look at some of his last drafts. You got Marcus Smart. You got Terry Rozier. Even if you go way back in the day, you got Delonte Wests and you got Tony Allens. Danny Ainge has never really been a huge fan of taking, a Jamal Murray type of guard. Just a pure shooter. So I think Danny Ainge is going to pick Chris Dunn. He's going to go best player available, and he's not going to consider the fit with the team. But that's fine, because Chris Dunn actually would fit with this Boston Celtics roster. Here's the plan. If Boston drafts Chris Dunn, they can actually keep him without swinging a deal. What they can do, you start Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley for now, and you bring off the bench a two-headed monster of Chris Dunn and Marcus Smart, which is incredibly athletic. Chris Dunn, I got his comparisons as kind of a little bit of a Rondo, a little bit of a Gary Payton. Fits in perfectly as a ball-dominant point guard at the next level, who to me is unlike Marcus Smart. To me, I don't see Marcus Smart as a pure point guard. Marcus Smart to me is more of a combo guard, a guy who can absolutely guard a 2 or guard a 3 or guard a 4. You can insert him as a 3 in small ball lineups. They could go Thomas, Dunn, and Smart because Smart has the ability to defend bigger players. Same goes for Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn can defend a lot of bigger players. And here we have the Celtics following the Golden State Warriors model of versatility, of guys who can play multiple positions. And I think it would really work. The question, of course, is shooting, but keep in mind that Marcus Smart improved with his shooting as the season continued, especially in the playoffs. And I think not having to rely on Marcus Smart as a consistent playmaker would actually do a lot for Marcus Smart's game. I think it would allow him to lock in more defensively. I think it would allow him to improve his shot more, to let the game come to him a little bit more, instead of when Smart makes some of those poor mistakes when he's kind of forced into the primary playmaker role. So there you have it. Chris Dunn to the Celtics at 3. All right, we got Phoenix with the 4 pick. Phoenix is not going to take a guard. They have so many guards. I know it's different with Phoenix, though, because Boston actually will pick another guard. Phoenix won't. So here we go. Phoenix with the 4 pick. There's been a lot of talk about Marquise Chris, but I actually think that if Boston passes on Dragan Bender, that Dragan Bender is a really, really hard guy to pass up here. To me, he's a little bit of an Andre Karolinko with an improved jump shot. And when you think about it, if Andre Karolinko played in the modern NBA, think about how much more valuable he'd be than those mid-2000s Jazz teams. I think Dragan Bender is a great fit in Phoenix. He can run and gun with these guys. He clearly fits a need at the 4 so that they no longer play those abysmal Alex Len, Tyson Chandler front courts. Bender also doesn't have to contribute right away. I don't think Phoenix is planning on being back into the playoffs anytime soon. He'll provide some shooting around guys like Bledsoe or TJ Warren who aren't great shooters. It's really a great fit to have Bender in Phoenix. And with our next pick, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves, where I have them picking, drumroll, Buddy Hield, who to me is the next Jimmy Butler. Yes, I think his ceiling is that high. Buddy Hield worked his butt off every single year at Oklahoma, got incrementally better, and there's no reason why he's going to stop now. Buddy Hield is exactly the kind of player Tom Thibodeau loves. Just an absolute worker. Reminds me a lot of Jimmy Butler in that way. It's just a classic Tom Thibodeau pick. There's no other guy who would make sense, if Chris Dunn is off the board, for Minnesota to take. If you remember that Tom Thibodeau is the GM, you would think, Jamal Murray makes sense, right? We want to add a shooter to this core. But then you think about Tom Thibodeau, and you think, no. He wants more of a blue-collar kind of guy, a guy who's gonna work in the offseason. Not that Jamal Murray doesn't, but Buddy Hield, I think, is a guy who can set the tone with a lot of those other young, high-character guys like Andrew Wiggins and Karl Towns. But you better believe that if Chris Dunn is still on the board at number 5, I think that's the guy Minnesota takes, and then they move on from Ricky Rubio. Should be interesting, but I got Buddy there going to Minnesota. The 6th pick, it's the Pelicans, and I think the guy that the Pelicans want kind of falls in their lap. That's Jamal Murray. Pelicans could definitely use some shooting along the perimeter. They'll be losing probably Eric Gordon to free agency. I don't think Drew Holiday is much of a long-term fixture. And Tyreke Evans also seems to kind of be a temporary placeholder. So to me, Jamal Murray makes a lot of sense for the Pelicans. I'm not sold on the move for the Pelicans because I think Murray needs other ball handlers and other competent players to play alongside him where he can kind of feed off of them a little bit, right? And that's where I kind of got his comparison as a CJ McCollum. One that I saw from NBADraft.net was Ben Gordon, which I actually really liked. I'm not going to steal their comparison, but I like the Ben Gordon comp. CJ McCollum also makes a lot of sense. And you can think about how defenses focus in on Lillard, and that opens up a lot of opportunities for McCollum. Kind of similar even to in Golden State how Klay Thompson can get it going just because teams are so dialed in on Steph Curry. So we'll see how Murray turns out with the Pelicans, but I think Murray would make a lot of sense also in Boston, where he could provide some much needed shooting, and there would be other good defenders that would be able to make up for his defensive lapses, let's say, that he experiences from time to time. Denver at number 7. All right. They're going to take Jaylen Brown. And Jaylen Brown is a guy I think who could definitely go number 3 to Boston. That's what makes this draft so weird. There isn't a clear cut. If one player gets passed on, they could start falling pretty far. But Jaylen Brown to me is kind of a Corey Maggette or a Desmond Mason. Kind of one of those wing slashers, a hyper-athletic talent. Jaylen Brown to Denver? I like it. You can kind of run and gun there with Mudiay. It makes a lot of sense. I think Denver would be getting a steal if Jaylen Brown fell to them there. All right. Now we have the Kings, and I remind you that this is not what I want to have happen, but this is what I think will happen. And when you got the Sacramento Kings picking with all the obvious top 7 prospects off the board, you just have no idea what's going to happen. The Kings are going to do something crazy. They're going to find a way to pick the next Nick Stauskas / Ben McLemore. They're just going to do it. And that's why they're taking DeJounte Murray. I think they're going to go with some kind of out of left field kind of pick. I think Wade Baldwin would work a lot here too. But then again, I remembered it was the Kings, and then I thought, of course, it's not supposed to make sense. They're not supposed to pick Wade Baldwin. Of course, they're going to do something crazy, like pick DeJounte Murray. They're going to, reach for Thon Maker. I'm kidding, not that much. But you could see this happening, right? You could see them reaching for some kind of guy who they only see the strengths. It's like they choose to watch only the strengths Draft Express video, and they just want to block the weakness video out of their mind. It seems like a perfect DeJounte Murray kind of guy because his flashes are tremendous. But man, he forces the ball a lot. He makes a lot of silly mistakes. He's got a weird feel for the game that I'm just not really sold on. Reminds me a little bit of a young Monta Ellis, a little bit of an undisciplined kind of player like that. He's a little Jamal Crawford-y. I would say that would probably be his ceiling if he were able to kind of fine-tune his game. Remember Jamal Crawford, when he was younger, was kind of a erratic and irresponsible ball handler and scorer and things like that. So there you go. Sacramento takes DeJounte Murray. This is fun, isn't it? You got Toronto at number 9. This is really interesting because Toronto is one of those teams that is already very, very good. Went to the Eastern Conference Finals. So they're going to want a guy who they can plug in right away that makes a lot of sense. Now, they need a power forward, so you're probably thinking, oh, okay, Marquise Chris. Yeah, if Marquise Chris is still around here, it makes a lot of sense. I don't think so, because Chris is not a player who will be able to contribute from day one. Instead, one of the players who can contribute from his first day on the job is Domantas Sabonis. Love Sabonis. He's one of my favorite players in this draft. He's an all-around hustle, energy kind of guy, a high motor, a high IQ. These are the kind of guys who don't fail in the NBA. They stick around. And they're not going to be a superstar. You know, Toronto doesn't need a superstar. Toronto needs a guy to replace a Louis Scola. And that's why, for me, Sabonis is kind of like Scola in a lot of ways, but a younger Scola, which is exactly what the Raptors need. He's also got a little bit of Montejunas in his game, I would say. So Sabonis is really interesting to me. I think you plug him in right away there in Toronto as the backup to Patrick Patterson. Would be a great move for the Raptors. All right, Milwaukee with the 10 pick. Milwaukee is pretty interesting because I think they need some shooting and things like that, but they're also trying to move away from Greg Monroe. So, what do they do here? I'm going to go with Skal Labissiere. I think I'm saying that right. Who to me reminds me so much of Nerlens Noel. It's uncanny, the resemblance. Just such a long, unpolished shot blocker coming out of school. Both went to Kentucky. Both underwhelmed significantly. And both will still stay in the lottery just because the draft that they're getting picked in is not particularly good. Although, let's be clear, this draft is much better than the Anthony Bennett / Nerlens Noel draft. Skal makes some sense for the Milwaukee Bucks, just because of the length that the Bucks are trying to establish there. You add him and his high ceiling to, you know, a lineup that features the Greek Freak and, guys like John Henson and, Jabari Parker and Michael Carter-Williams. I think it kind of fits with the mold that they're building there. Personally, I'd pass on Skal. He's not one of the top talents in this draft, I don't feel. I'm not entirely sold on his ability to shoot. I think, that one workout where we saw him shooting some jumpers, reminds me a lot of Porzingis' workouts before the draft, and people are saying, so what? He's doing this 1-on-0. So Skal to Milwaukee, Orlando. Does anyone, what are the Magic doing? Do they want another guard here because they have no backup guards? Do they get a swingman? Do they want a big? Nobody knows really with Orlando. But I'm going to say that they take Deyonta Davis, who I have pegged as the next Serge Ibaka. He's got a solid jumper thus far. He's got very nice length. I like this guy. I like Davis. A lot of Michigan State products end up turning out well in the NBA. I think Davis is a good high upside kind of guy to play the modern five in the NBA. I think Vucevic is kind of a placeholder right there right now for the Orlando Magic. So I think adding Davis makes a lot of sense for the Magic as a type of swing for the fences or a type of project guy who really could become a very good player in just a couple years. All right, and now we come to the 12th pick, which interestingly was just traded to the Atlanta Hawks in that three-way deal, sending George Hill to the Utah Jazz, Jeff Teague to the Indiana Pacers, and this pick here to the Atlanta Hawks. Just for the record, I thought that was a great three-team trade. I think all teams involved really won that one. I think the Jazz get better right now by adding George Hill. I think that, Jeff Teague fits what Indiana's trying to do and up-tempo and a lot of playmakers and things like that. And I think Atlanta gets, a solid return. It maybe could have gotten more, but I think getting a lottery pick for Jeff Teague when they were clearly trying to move on from him and trying to implement the Schroeder era, I think it works. So here I have Atlanta taking Furkan Korkmaz, who reminds me a pretty good amount of James Young. He's primarily a shooter, but he's a little bit crafty offensively as well. It's kind of got some deceptive athleticism. And I think, if James Young were to be in a situation where he could get more minutes instead of in Boston, I think James Young would be a solid NBA player. So, same applies for Furkan. I think he could turn out to be a solid wing. I think Atlanta definitely needs wings. You're going to have Bazemore moving on, and I think Furkan is a guy who you can plug in there, can kind of fit the space and pace of the Atlanta Hawks team. So I think it makes a lot of sense there. All right, and now we're at the point where you're saying, where is Marquise Chriss? Did he forget about him? No. I think Marquise Chriss is due for a slide on draft night. It might not be this far, but I think that Chriss is going to fall. I think when it actually comes down for a team to pull the trigger on a guy who just started playing basketball, a guy who is as raw as Chriss is, he's going to start to slide. It's hard to pick a guy like that if you're a GM, a guy who you know you're going to have to wait several years on. I think Orlando would be another place where they could pick him, but the fit with Marquise Chriss as well as Aaron Gordon is kind of suspect, because I think both are probably more in the four or the modern power forward role. But I think right here you got Phoenix at 13. I think Phoenix doesn't have to necessarily take Marquise Chriss with the 4 pick to ensure that they get him. I think that Marquise Chriss could slide about as far down as this. I think he could go as high as Sacramento. He could go as high as 4 to Phoenix. But I think if Phoenix passes on him there, he could go as high as 8 to Sacramento. But some of these other teams in here just don't seem like Chriss-type destinations. Milwaukee, I don't think they really need a 4. Toronto, they need a guy now. Atlanta, they have Millsap. Milwaukee already have Jabari Greek Freak. What's going on with Milwaukee? So I think Marquise Chriss could legitimately fall this low. I am not high on this guy. I actually think if you look at his highlights from college, he reminds me a lot of Anthony Bennett, which is about the worst comparison you could get if you're an NBA prospect. I'm not sold on Chriss. He's got a long way to go. Yes, his ceiling is very, very high, but I think there's been some questions about kind of his work ethic and where his head's at, and his basketball IQ is so low right now that I'm just not sure you'll ever really be able to teach him some basketball instincts. So there you go, Marquise Chriss with the slide. Now Chicago, how interesting. We come to another team that just made a trade. They just traded Dwayne Wade. I just say Dwayne Wade? Derrick Rose. Just traded Derrick Rose. I'm thinking about, the Heat, or it's hot in here. Anyway, so you got Derrick Rose on the move, going to New York. Nice move by New York, by the way, just as a side note. So here I have Chicago coming up with a replacement for Derrick Rose, going with Wade Baldwin, who's a little bit of a Michael Carter-Williams to me, or a little bit of a Tony Wroten in college. He's a nice finisher. He attacks the rim relentlessly. I think he's going to be a solid player. He's got a little bit of that, Westbrook, just, absolute tenacity when attacking the rim. I think that would be, a nice fit if Chicago does decide to keep Jimmy Butler. I think Wade Baldwin is not that far from being NBA ready. I think he could contribute as a rookie. So I think he kind of fits what Chicago's trying to do there. Next is Denver with the 15 pick. And they're going to kind of get a guy who slid a little bit, as I had both Milwaukee and Orlando, 2 possible destinations, going with more high upside picks. But I think Denver could make a really solid move here by drafting Jakob Poeltl. I think I said it right. To me, he reminds me a little bit of Steven Adams, but, Steven Adams was really good in these playoffs. I mean, maybe a poor man Steven Adams, or is a poor man Steven Adams and Omer Asik? I think so. So I think Jakob Poeltl could work there in Denver. They got a lot of big guys, that's for sure. They got some things to sort out in Denver, that's for sure. But I think just adding talent for Denver at the end of the day, and I could see Denver trading this pick or trading their 19 pick as well. All right, we got Boston at 16. Why would you trade for Kevin Love when you can just draft the next Kevin Love? I think I'm going to go with Henry Ellenson to the Boston Celtics right here. And here's your eye rolls. Yes, the Big East guy himself just picked two Big East guys to be on his favorite team. How biased can you get? Can't believe you guys still listen to me, man. This is crazy. Henry Ellenson, I think, would be a nice fit on Boston, though, in all seriousness, if he does fall this low. He is a lot like Kevin Love. He's got the long-range jump shot. He's a great rebounder, but he's just not that great of a defender. He can get some defensive rebounds, not quite as good of an offensive rebounder as Kevin Love was. But his shooting is something that Boston would absolutely need, especially if they went with Chris Dunn with that first pick. I could see Henry Ellenson also falling kind of like Marquise Chris, just because of a lot of the defensive question marks and kind of where the league is headed and just how bad Kevin Love played throughout these finals. I think it's going to kind of scare teams away because they see that comparison so strongly. Still, though, I think it would be a very nice move for Boston. I think it would allow them to kind of move on from Kelly Olynyk in a lot of ways, who, to me, is just too hesitant and too inconsistent. I think Ellenson is a much more consistent guy, proved it at Marquette. You know, people forget that Marquette team was pretty shaky at a lot of times, good talent, but a lot of their guards were pretty off and on a lot of the time. Kind of turned the ball over too much and didn't necessarily feed Ellenson. I think he could have done even better in a different situation, I think. So there's Ellenson going to the Celtics. You got Memphis taking Malachi Richardson because apparently that's the rumor that Memphis has promised Richardson that they will take him with the 17th pick. Richardson's got a little bit of a Jeremy Lamb to him, a little bit of an O.J. Mayo. He's got some great footwork. He's got pretty nice size for probably a 2 at the next level. He's got a nice pull-up jump shot. I think he's just an overall solid offensive player. For a team that's desperately needed wings, I could see Memphis going with Malachi Richardson right here. Makes some sense. All right, and now we have Detroit picking the steal of the draft. That's right. I think when we look back on this draft in 5 years, we're going to say one of the best players in this draft was Denzel Valentine. His comparison for me is Manu Ginobili. Yes, I think Valentine has that kind of upside. He's not quite as good as Ginobili. I'm not trying to disrespect the future Hall of Famer, but Valentine does a lot of the same things. He can provide playmaking at the shooting guard spot off the bench. I think his jump shot ability fits in well with Detroit and the spacing that Stan Van Gundy is trying to create on that team to surround Andre Drummond. You got the steal of the draft right here. Now, again, if we were going with what we want to happen, right, and me as a Celtics fan, I want the Celtics to take Denzel Valentine at 16. I think it's absolutely a great fit there. He can slide, if they take a Bender or a Brown, and I think Brown can play a little bit of small ball 4, then I think you can have Valentine as a really nice backup to Avery Bradley, a guy who can play alongside and take some of the playmaking responsibilities away from Marcus Smart, and also could serve as some insurance if Evan Turner decides to bolt in free agency. So there you have it. Now we got Denver with the 19th pick. Again, I could see this totally being traded, but I say Cheek Diallo kind of makes some sense here. He's a little bit of a Noah Vonleh to me. He's a little bit of an unknown. Didn't really play that much in Denver. Denver can kind of wait on him, though. They don't need anything right away. He could replace Fareed in a couple years. I think he's a guy who teams, probably see as being one of the highest values to take here at the 19 pick. And keep in mind that in my draft already, I've had them taking Podol as well as Jaylen Brown. So I think, adding a power forward to, to that front court line, they pick 3 front court guys, I think would be a very nice haul for Denver and would allow them to kind of sort out that mess that they have in the front court. Let's go to 20, where the Indiana Pacers pick Timothy Luwawu. Got the best name in the draft. He reminds me a little bit of an Avery Bradley. I like him a lot. He's versatile. He can hit the 3-ball. He's athletic. He kind of fits this run and gun Pacers system that I think they're trying to implement. He could serve as a nice backup to Monta Ellis in place of guys like Rodney Stuckey, who I think, Stuckey's time is about done in this league. Then you got Atlanta at 21 picking for the second time after they picked Furkan Korkmaz with the 12th pick. Here I got them going DeAndre Bembry, who to me reminds me a lot of Evan Turner. He's just such a Spurs or Hawks kind of guy. He's so skilled offensively. He's not flashy. He makes the right plays. He's a guy who can, hit a three from time to time, but his jump shot is not the strongest part of his game. Instead, it's just his overall playmaking ability, and I could see Atlanta and Coach Budenholzer wanting more playmakers along the wing. Makes a lot of sense there for Atlanta. Next, we got Charlotte, where I have Malik Beasley. He's kind of got a little bit of a Corey Joseph thing going for him. He seems kind of the opposite of DeJounte Murray for me, because he's got more polish but less flashes, whereas you have Murray with more flashes but less polish. Malik Beasley doesn't really have that high of a ceiling, I don't think, but I think he's a guy who can come in right away and contribute and hustle. He's got a little bit of Kemba Walker, too. Not quite as skilled offensively, but just in his high IQ and motor and overall attitude, I think. So I like Malik Beasley here. I think it makes sense for, a win-now type of team that Charlotte is. They never like to pick for upside. They always go with a guy who's solid as is. Boston here with the 23rd pick. The chances that Boston actually picks here are probably 5%. But if they do somehow end up with this pick, I'm going to go with Taurean Prince. He looks exactly like DeMar Carroll. So to me, I was like, okay, I'm going to come up with a really creative NBA comparison for Taurean Prince because everyone just says DeMar Carroll. So I watched film on Prince for about 10 to 15 minutes, and I realized these two are exactly the same. There really is no better comparison for the way they play, just the overall way that they carry themselves on the floor. Taurean Prince is DeMar Carroll. There's so many similarities right there. Taurean Prince is kind of he could play the small ball four. He's a very aggressive defender, a very tenacious kind of guy, but he can step out and hit the shot, much like Carroll. So I think Prince is a great player for these teams in the early 20s to take a look at. Now I have Philly here at 24, going with Demetrius Jackson, who's kind of Ramon Sessions to me, a little bit of an athletic point guard, but, nothing really too special or too out of the ordinary. I like Jackson, though. I think he will be better than Ramon Sessions. I think he's kind of Sessions at his peak. I think Jackson will be a productive NBA player. He ran a very efficient Notre Dame offense all season long. I was impressed by him. Jerry and Grant leaves, and he kind of takes the reins of this team and gets them to go further than a lot of people had thought. So I like Jackson as a guy who can kind of run your second line. I think that would be a good pick for Philly as they try to add anything to that backcourt. Clippers next, where I have them taking Bryce Johnson, or a guy who's kind of like Brendan Wright. Very good finisher. He's ready right away. A high-character guy. He seems like the type who will fit right in with the Clippers from day one. You can throw him lobs. It fits perfect in Lob City. Really like the Bryce Johnson Clippers connection. I would be shocked if that didn't happen, actually. I think if Bryce Johnson is there on the board at 23, he's a Doc Rivers type. I think Doc absolutely takes him. With the 26th pick, Philly goes with Thon Maker. Why not, right? NBA comparison, I have no idea. I'm not ever going to try to understand Thon Maker, and I'm not going to try to understand the Sixers either. But Philly can wait on him. It seems like the kind of another high upside type of move that Philly can make. They're not going to get anyone with higher upside at the 26th pick, and they can kind of just wait on Maker and Embiid and, kind of groom them and wait on them and see what happens, I guess. But you could see Philly doing that, right? Yeah, makes sense. All right, Toronto at 27. I got them taking a guy who most people have in the second round, but who I think could kind of sneak into this tier. That's Pat McCaw, who's kind of a Corey Brewer or KJ McDaniels type to me. I think he'd just be some wing insurance for Toronto. They might have James Johnson moving on, just in case if DeMar DeRozan leaves. But I think McCaw is a very, very solid defender, a guy who can learn a lot from a DeMar Carroll. I think he'd be in a good situation there in Toronto. Phoenix, well, at this point, they kind of have a pretty complete team, right? If they're drafting Bender as well as Marquise Chriss, they're pretty solid at that power forward spot. You have Len and Chandler at the center. You got a plethora of guards, and you got PJ Tucker and TJ Warren at the 3. It seems like a pretty complete team. But I'm going to have them take another backcourt guy because Phoenix could probably use a fourth guard, I guess, a fourth or fifth guard. And in that case, I think Isaiah Cousins is actually a nice fit. He's a guy who has steadily been climbing. First people had him going in the 50s. Now he's made it all the way up to the 30s. I think he could go as high as the first round. He's got a little bit of Aaron Brooks to me in his game, a little bit of a bigger mold, though. He's been climbing up draft boards, like I said, so I like Cousins as a fourth guard. He's probably just about ready to contribute from day one. The Spurs are going to pick a Hall of Famer here, no matter who it is. That's right. I got them going with Malcolm Brogdon. I really like Brogdon. UVA product. This would be the first time in UVA history that 2 basketball players had been drafted in back-to-back drafts. That's right, with Justin Anderson going to the Mavericks last summer. So you got Brogdon here. My NBA comparison is a Avery Bradley type. Not entirely sold on that one. It's hard to peg Brogdon exactly, but I think he's a very smart player. UVA guys are, and he can shoot the long ball. He can do a lot. I think Brogdon would be a very nice fit with the Spurs. There's a 3-and-D type of guy. A nice guy who they could groom off the bench. Golden State Warriors, last pick of the first round, and all of a sudden we're looking at a Warriors team that actually needs to improve in order to win again next year. They'll have a lot of front court guys leaving. I was tempted to go with maybe an A.J. Hammonds or someone like that, even just someone who is ready and can contribute from day one. I think a Steven Zimmerman would make sense here as well. But I'm going to go with Ben Bentel. That's right. How biased am I? Man, you're still listening to me? Oh, crazy. All right, Ben Bentel, another one of my Big East guys, is the sleeper of this draft. I mean, in kind of the second round tier, because Denzel Valentine's my first round sleeper. But Ben Bentel, nevertheless, fantastic player. I got him as kind of a Markieff Morris or an Al-Farouq Aminu. But to be honest, he's the closest thing to Draymond Green that I have seen since Draymond Green. I'm going to say it again. I said it on my podcast with Pat just a couple weeks back. Bentel, to me, he's the perfect versatile wing. He, for some reason, when scouts evaluate him or when the media evaluates him, they look at him as like a tweener. They say, well, he's an okay rebounder maybe, or they say, he's kind of a 3-point shooter, and I'm like, wow, guys, get your head in the game. It's 2016. This guy's perfect for the NBA. He shot a little bit poorly from 3 last year, but let's talk about that Providence team, because there were really 2 main guys on that team and kind of a third there with Rodney Bullock. But there was a lot of lacking support on that team, and Ben Bentel had to do a lot. And I think some of his lack of efficiency came from that. So I think if you put him in a bench role, he would be able to be very, very productive. And there's my mock draft. Yay. Send me all of your hate, all of it, to my Twitter. That's at @LFlynn_NBA Nova. I'm going to give a shout out, though, to Daniel Ochefu and Ryan Arcidiacono, though, as hopefully they get picked in the second round. I could see Daniel Ochefu going to, say, the Orlando Magic, where he has had 2 workouts. I could see Arcidiacono going to the Sixers, the hometown boy. He makes some sense as well at the Pelicans, where he recently worked out. But yeah, it should be really exciting to see. If those guys don't get drafted, no worries, Nova Nation. They are going to get summer league deals. They are too talented for teams to pass up on and have just accomplished too much in college. But for the sake of those guys, I hope they get to hear their name called. It's just such a fantastic moment this draft is. Just to see these guys' dreams come true, man. It was my dream when I was 10 years old that I would get called and, I'd be in the green room and all that. Fell a little bit short, but don't mind that. Great show, guys. Thanks, of course, for listening to my podcast. Let me know what you think. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to like and share if you actually do like or want to share. So thanks, of course, for listening, and enjoy the draft.